What would you do if your husband emptied your bank account, humiliated you with his mistress at the mall, then slapped you while you're 7 months pregnant, all caught on live stream for millions to see? Sarah thought her life was over. Her card declined buying baby diapers. Her marriage destroyed on social media. But what she didn't know was that the quiet security guard watching everything unfold was actually her billionaire father she thought had abandoned her years ago. And he was about to turn her worst nightmare into the ultimate revenge story. This is a tale of betrayal, hidden power, and justice served cold. Hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe because this story will leave you speechless. Lara. Elizabeth Mitchell stood frozen at the checkout counter, her 7-month pregnant belly pressing against the edge as the cashier's words echoed in her mind. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined." The baby items scattered across the counter suddenly felt like evidence of her naivety. Tiny onesies, a car seat, bottles for the daughter she'd planned to welcome in 2 months. The other customers in line shifted impatiently behind her. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. The joint account she shared with her husband Marcus showed a balance of $0.13. Her heart hammered as she scrolled through the transaction history. Yesterday, there had been $43,000. Today, a single withdrawal had cleaned out everything. The memo read simply, "Business Investment, MAC, Marcus Anthony Caldwell." Her husband of 3 years, the tech CEO who had convinced her to quit her rising marketing career to focus on their future family. "Ma'am, I need to move to the next customer," the teenage cashier said, not unkindly but with growing impatience. Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as she gathered the baby items. "I'm sorry, I'll have to come back." Outside Target, she sat in her Honda Civic and tried calling Marcus. The phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. A text message finally came through. "At Westfield Mall with investors. Can't talk. Handle whatever it is yourself." Sarah stared at the message, feeling the baby kick restlessly inside her. Handle whatever it is yourself. As if discovering your husband had stolen your life savings was just another minor inconvenience. She thought about their conversation last week, when she'd mentioned wanting to put $10,000 into a separate account for baby expenses. Marcus had dismissed it, saying they needed every dollar for his new venture. "Trust me, Sarah, I know what's best for our family." Trust. The word tasted bitter now. The drive to Westfield Mall took 25 minutes through afternoon traffic. Sarah's hands shook on the steering wheel as she thought about confronting Marcus. He had a way of making her feel like she was overreacting, like her concerns were symptoms of hormonal pregnancy brain rather than legitimate issues. But this wasn't about forgetting to pay a bill or miscommunication about expenses. This was their entire safety net, gone without discussion or consent. Sarah parked near the main entrance and walked slowly through the crowded mall, one hand supporting her lower back. The familiar ache of carrying extra weight made each step deliberate. She spotted Marcus immediately outside Tiffany & Company, his tall frame unmistakable in his tailored gray suit. He was laughing at something, animated in a way Sarah rarely saw him anymore. Then she saw why. A young blonde woman stood beside him, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his arm as they examined something in the jewelry store window. She was everything Sarah felt she no longer was: slim, polished, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. Sarah approached slowly, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe this woman was a client, an investor, someone Marcus needed to impress for business. But then Marcus leaned down and kissed the woman's cheek, his hands settling possessively on her waist. "Marcus," Sarah's voice came out smaller than intended. He turned, and for just a moment, she saw genuine shock flash across his face before it hardened into irritation. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I came to find you because our bank account is empty." She kept her voice steady, aware of the other shoppers slowing their pace to listen. $43,000. Gone. I couldn't even buy diapers for our daughter." The blonde woman stepped closer to Marcus, her eyes bright with curiosity rather than embarrassment. She looked younger up close, maybe 24, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been publicly humiliated while 7 months pregnant. "This is my wife," Marcus told the woman, his tone suggesting Sarah was more burdened than beloved. Sarah, this is Brittany Stevens, my executive assistant. Brittany smiled with perfect white teeth. Oh, the wife Marcus has told me so much about you. The casual cruelty of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked between them, seeing how Marcus's body language had shifted to shield Brittany, how he'd positioned himself as if Sarah were an intruder in their intimate moment. Marcus, we need to talk. Privately. Sarah's voice carried a warning edge she hadn't known she possessed. Actually, Brittany said, pulling out her phone. This is kind of perfect timing. I've been documenting our shopping trip for my social media. My followers love behind-the-scenes content from successful couples. Our shopping trip, successful couples. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just financial betrayal. This wasn't just an affair. This was replacement. Put the phone away, Brittany, Marcus said, but his tone lacked conviction. No, this is actually amazing content, Brittany replied, already recording. Real-life drama. You know, my followers eat this stuff up. Sarah watched in horror as Brittany angled the phone to capture both her and Marcus. The red recording light blinked like an accusation. Please don't film this, Sarah said, instinctively placing her hands over her belly. This is private. Nothing's private anymore, sweetie, Brittany said with mock sympathy. Welcome to 2025. Besides, you're the one who came here making a scene. Marcus should have defended her, should have demanded Brittany stop filming. Instead, he looked annoyed, like Sarah was the one behaving inappropriately. Sarah, you're being dramatic, he said. The money is fine. I moved it for the business. You know how important this investment opportunity is. What business? What investment? Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You took every penny we have without telling me. That was our emergency fund. That was our baby's future. Your baby's future is secure, Marcus said. My company is about to go through a major expansion. This is bigger than your small-scale thinking can grasp. The condescension in his voice was familiar, but saying it in front of Brittany's camera made it feel deliberately cruel. Our baby, Sarah corrected. And our money. Money I contributed from my career before you convinced me to quit. Brittany laughed, a sound like broken glass. Oh, wow, she's actually trying to claim credit for your success. Marcus, this is perfect. I'm not claiming credit, Sarah said, turning to address the camera directly. I'm asking my husband why he stole $43,000 from our joint account without discussion. Marcus's face darkened. That's my money, Sarah. I earned it. You've been living off my generosity for 2 years while you play house and gain weight. The cruelty was breathtaking. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as other shoppers openly stared now, drawn by the raised voices and Brittany's phone camera. Marcus, please, Sarah said quietly. Can we discuss this privately, without the camera? Actually, no, Brittany interjected. I think people should see this. I think they should see what successful men have to deal with when they outgrow their partners. She turned the camera toward herself, switching into influencer mode. Hey everyone, Brittany here with some real-life drama. I'm here with Marcus Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Technologies. And apparently his wife just showed up to make demands about money that isn't even hers. Sarah watched in disbelief as Brittany began narrating the situation like it was entertainment, describing Marcus as a self-made success story, and Sarah as a dependent wife who trapped him with pregnancy. That's not true, Sarah said, but her voice was lost in Brittany's confident commentary. This is exactly why successful men need to be careful. Brittany continued to her audience. Some women see a provider and think they can just coast. But Marcus is building an empire, and he needs a partner who matches his ambition, not someone who thinks getting pregnant is an accomplishment. The words hit like physical blows. Sarah looked at Marcus, waiting for him to contradict these lies, to defend their marriage, to remember the love they'd once shared. Instead, he nodded along with Brittany's narrative. The pregnancy wasn't planned, he said to the camera. I've been clear about wanting to wait until the company was more established. But Sarah made the decision unilaterally. Made the decision? Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. We talked about starting a family. You said you wanted children. I said maybe someday, Marcus corrected. when the timing was right, when I could afford to provide properly, but you decided to stop taking precautions without consulting me. It was a complete rewriting of their history. Sarah remembered the conversations about baby names, looking at houses with good school districts, Marcus's excitement when they'd first started trying to conceive, but looking at him now, she wondered if she'd imagined all of it. Brittany was still filming, her followers' comments streaming across the screen in real time. Most were supportive of her narrative, calling Sarah everything from gold digger to baby trapper to worse. The crazy part, Brittany said, is that she's acting like she has rights to his money when she hasn't contributed anything to the relationship in years. Like, honey, pregnancy isn't a job. Sarah felt something break inside her chest. The humiliation was complete. Broadcast live to thousands of strangers who were now forming opinions about her life based on deliberate lies. I contributed everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave up my career. I supported your dreams. I loved you. Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time, maybe recognizing that he'd gone too far. But Brittany wasn't finished. Love doesn't pay bills, she said to the camera, and successful men deserve partners who add value, not just emotional drama. In the crowd that had gathered, Sarah noticed a security guard watching the situation with unusual intensity. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Something about him felt familiar, but Sarah couldn't place him through her emotional fog. The guard stepped forward. Folks, you're blocking the walkway. I need to ask you to move along or take this conversation somewhere private. His voice was calm but authoritative, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus looked annoyed. We're just talking. You're creating a spectacle, the guard replied, and the young lady is filming without consent from everyone involved. That's against mall policy. Brittany lowered her phone slightly. Excuse me, this is public space. I have every right to film here. Actually, you don't, the guard said. This is private property, and I'm asking you to stop filming. For the first time since arriving, Sarah felt a moment of relief. Someone was finally intervening on her behalf. But that relief was short-lived. Marcus stepped closer to Sarah, his voice low but his words chosen for maximum impact. You want to know the truth, he said. You trapped me with this pregnancy, and now you're trying to trap me financially. But I won't be held hostage by your manipulation anymore. Before Sarah could respond, before she could process the full meaning of his words, Marcus did something that would change everything. He slapped her. The sound of Marcus's palm connecting with Sarah's cheek echoed through the mall corridor like a gunshot. For a moment, everything went silent. Shoppers froze mid-step. Children stopped crying. Even the ambient mall music seemed to pause. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face as her pregnant body fought to maintain balance. The security guard lunged forward, catching her elbow just as she started to fall. Jesus Christ, someone in the crowd whispered. Brittany's phone was still recording. The red light blinked steadily as she captured every second of Sarah's humiliation, her mouth open in shock that quickly transformed into excitement. Oh my God, did everyone see that? Brittany said to her camera, her voice breathless with adrenaline. He actually hit her. This is insane. This is going viral for sure. The security guard's grip on Sarah's arm was gentle but firm. Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? Sarah touched her stinging cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where Marcus's hand had struck. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. In front of dozens of witnesses and thousands of online viewers, her husband had just announced to the world that their marriage, their child, their entire life together was nothing more than a trap he'd fallen into. I'm okay, she whispered, though she clearly wasn't. Marcus looked stunned by his own actions, his hand still raised as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing remorse, he doubled down. She pushed me to that, he said, his voice carrying across the silent mall. Months of manipulation, threats, emotional blackmail. I'm not the villain here. You just hit a pregnant woman, the security guard said, his voice deadly quiet. There was something in his tone that made Marcus take a step back. In front of 50 witnesses and a live stream. You want to explain to me how that makes you the victim? Brittany was frantically reading comments from her live stream, her excitement growing with each notification. Oh wow, we're already trending on TikTok. Hashtag pregnancy. Trap is blowing up. Marcus, you need to see this. People are totally on your side. She turned the camera toward herself, switching into damage control mode. Guys, I know that looked bad, but you have to understand the context here. Marcus has been dealing with emotional abuse for months. Sometimes people snap when they're being pushed beyond their limits. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, turning Marcus into the victim and herself into the abuser. That's not what happened, Sarah said, but her voice was too quiet, too shocked to carry over Brittany's confident commentary. The security guard was studying Marcus with the intensity of someone trained to read people. Sir, I need to see some identification. Why what? Marcus demanded. I'm the one being harassed here because you just committed assault in front of multiple witnesses, and I need to file a report. It wasn't assault, Brittany interjected. It was self-defense. She was threatening him financially, trying to steal his money. The guard ignored her, keeping his focus on Marcus. ID. Now. Reluctantly, Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. The guard studied it carefully, and Sarah noticed his expression change slightly, as if the name meant something to him. Marcus Anthony Caldwell, the guard read aloud, CEO of Caldwell Technologies. That's right, Marcus said, his confidence returning. I'm a legitimate businessman being harassed by my unstable ex-wife. Ex-wife? Sarah's voice cracked. Marcus, we're still married. I'm carrying your child. Not for long, Marcus said. My lawyer will be filing papers tomorrow, and given what everyone just witnessed, given your obvious mental instability, I don't think custody will be much of an issue. The words hit Sarah like another slap. Through her shock, she began to understand that this wasn't a spontaneous confrontation. This was planned. The empty bank account, the public humiliation, Brittany's camera capturing everything. It was all orchestrated. You planned this, she whispered. Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I planned to move on with my life. Yes, I planned to stop letting you hold back my success. And thanks to your little scene here, I have plenty of evidence that you're unfit to raise a child. Brittany was still live streaming, narrating the drama for her growing audience. This is actually so sad, she told the camera. You can see how unstable she is, how she's trying to manipulate the situation even after attacking him. This is why men need to be so careful about who they trust. Sarah looked around at the crowd of onlookers. Some looked sympathetic, but many were nodding along with Brittany's version of events. The power of social media narrative was reshaping reality in real time. The security guard handed Marcus back his ID, but his expression remained stern. Mr. Caldwell, regardless of your marital situation, what I witnessed was assault. I'm required to call the police and file a report. That won't be necessary, said a smooth voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see a well-dressed man in his 40s approaching, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to fixing problems. Harrison Wells, Mr. Caldwell's attorney. He introduced himself to the guard. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Marcus visibly relaxed. Harrison, thank God, this situation is completely out of control. Wells surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, taking in Sarah's disheveled appearance, Brittany's phone, the crowd of onlookers, and the stern security guard. Officer Shaw, he said to the guard, my client is the victim of ongoing harassment from his estranged wife. What you witnessed was a man defending himself from emotional and financial abuse. I witnessed a man slap a pregnant woman, the guard replied flatly. You witnessed the culmination of months of manipulation and threats. Wells countered smoothly. Mr. Caldwell has been documenting his wife's increasingly erratic behavior in preparation for divorce proceedings. Her appearance here today, her demands for money she has no legal right to, her creation of a public scene. It's all part of a pattern of harassment. Sarah watched in horror as Wells presented a completely fabricated version of events with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. In fact, Wells continued, I have here a restraining order petition that we were planning to file tomorrow. Given today's events, I think we need to expedite that process. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out official-looking documents. Sarah caught glimpses of phrases like emotional instability, financial harassment, and threat to minor child. The security guard examined the papers with growing concern. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "do you have legal representation?" Sarah's mind went blank. A few hours ago, she'd been buying baby clothes. Now she was facing assault charges, divorce proceedings, and the potential loss of her unborn child. No, I don't understand what's happening." Wells smiled sympathetically. "Mrs. Caldwell is clearly overwhelmed by her condition. Pregnancy can affect women's judgment and emotional stability. That's why it's important to resolve this situation quickly and quietly, for everyone's benefit." Brittany was still filming, her audience now in the thousands. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Marcus, calling Sarah everything from psycho to gold digger to worse. Sarah felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if responding to her elevated stress. She placed both hands protectively over her belly, suddenly understanding that she wasn't just fighting for her marriage or her financial security. She was fighting for her child. But as she looked around at the hostile faces, at Brittany's gleeful live stream, at Marcus's cold satisfaction and his lawyer's predatory confidence, Sarah realized she was completely outmatched. The security guard was still watching her with what seemed like sympathy, but even he appeared to be wavering under the weight of Wells's legal maneuvering. "I think," Wells said to the guard, "the best resolution here is for Mrs. Caldwell to leave quietly and allow us to handle this through proper legal channels. No need for police reports or public scenes that would only make this situation more difficult for everyone involved." It was a threat disguised as a suggestion. Sarah understood that if she didn't leave now, things would get much worse for her. But as she turned to go, her legs shaky and her cheeks still stinging, she heard the security guard speak again. "Actually, Mr. Wells," he said, his voice carrying a new edge of authority, "I think there's something you should know before we proceed." Everyone turned to look at him, and Sarah noticed that his entire demeanor had changed. The deferent security guard was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, looking directly at Sarah, "my name is Robert Mitchell, Bobby, and I think it's time you knew who your father really is." The mall corridor went silent again, but this time it felt different, electric. Sarah stared at the security guard, at Bobby, as his words echoed in her mind. "Your father really is—" "I'm sorry," she whispered. Bobby's entire posture had changed. Gone was the deferential mall employee. In his place stood a man who radiated quiet authority, someone who looked like he'd spent decades making difficult decisions in dangerous situations. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," he said, and hearing her maiden name from his lips sent chills down her spine. Born September 15th, 1996, graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in marketing. Married Marcus Caldwell 3 years ago against her father's advice. Marcus stepped forward, his confidence wavering. "What the hell is this? Who are you?" "I told you," Bobby replied, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "I'm her father, Robert Mitchell, former Marine, current owner of Mitchell Security Solutions." Harrison Wells was frantically Googling something on his phone, his face growing pale as he read. "Bobby," Sarah's voice cracked. "But you left when I was 12. Mom said you abandoned us." "Your mother said what she had to say to protect you," Bobby replied. "What I told her to say, because the work I was doing, the people I was investigating, they would have used you and your sister to get to me." Brittany was still live streaming, her audience now watching with rapt attention as the drama took an unexpected turn. Guys, this is getting really weird," she told her camera. Wells looked up from his phone, his face ashen. "Mitchell Security Solutions, private military contracting, estimated net worth $3.7 billion. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, fear. "Billion," Sarah repeated weakly. "With a B," Bobby confirmed. "Turns out there's good money in keeping corporate executives and government officials alive in dangerous places." Who knew? Sarah's mind reeled. Her father, the man who'd supposedly abandoned his family for another woman, was a billionaire, and he'd been working as mall security, watching over her without her knowledge. How long have you been here? She asked. 6 months, Bobby admitted. Ever since Jennifer told me about the pregnancy and her concerns about Marcus's behavior. Jennifer, Sarah's head was spinning. Jen knows about this. Your sister's been keeping tabs on you for years. She's the one who called when she had noticed the warning signs. Controlling behavior, isolation from friends, financial dependency, classic patterns. Marcus found his voice. This is insane. You've been stalking my wife, protecting my daughter, Bobby corrected. And based on what I just witnessed, it's a good thing I was here. Moon Wells was furiously whispering something to Marcus, showing him his phone screen. Marcus's face went white as he read. Sarah caught fragments, $3 billion, os government contracts, os Senate connections. Wait, Sarah said, pieces clicking together. Mom always said you were military, but you worked some kind of desk job. That wasn't true. Bobby's expression softened slightly. I was special forces, then military intelligence, then private sector. The kind of work that makes enemies. The kind of enemies who don't hesitate to target families. So you let us think you abandoned us to protect us. I let you think I was weak so no one would ever think to use you against me. Bobby said, it was the hardest thing I ever did, but it kept you and Jen safe. Brittany's live stream was going crazy, comments flooding in faster than she could read them. The story had taken a turn no one expected. But why mall security? Sarah asked. If you're worth billions, why are you working here? Bobby almost smiled. I own the security company that contracts with this mall. Seemed like a good way to keep an eye on you without raising suspicions. Marcus was whispering urgently with Wells, but Bobby's enhanced hearing, a benefit of years in combat zones, picked up every word. Can't touch someone with that kind of money. Senate Defense Committee connections. We need to back down. Actually, Bobby said, addressing Wells directly. You might want to reconsider that restraining order petition, because I've been documenting everything for the past 6 months, and I have a very different version of events. He pulled out his phone and showed them a video of Marcus slapping Sarah, captured from a security camera angle that showed everything clearly. Assault on a pregnant woman, captured in high definition from multiple angles, along with audio of you admitting to stealing $43,000 from joint accounts. That's felony domestic violence and grand theft. Wells started backpedaling immediately. Now wait, let's not be hasty here. I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, we're going to work something out, Bobby agreed, but probably not the way you're thinking. Sarah was still processing everything. Her abandoned father was actually a billionaire who'd been protecting her from shadows. Her controlling husband had stolen their life savings as part of a planned public humiliation. Her entire understanding of her family history was built on lies designed to keep her safe. I need to sit down, she said weakly. Bobby was beside her instantly, guiding her to a bench with surprising gentleness for a man who radiated such controlled violence. Sarah, I know this is a lot, he said, but right now we need to focus on protecting you and my granddaughter. Granddaughter, Sarah looked up at him. Jennifer told me you're having a girl. I've been looking forward to meeting her. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something that might have been hope, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. Marcus emptied our accounts, she said. He's planning to divorce me and take the baby. His lawyer has restraining orders and custody papers. Had, Bobby corrected. Past tense, because Mr. Wells is about to explain to his client why continuing this course of action would be career suicide. Wells was indeed whispering urgently to Marcus, who looked like he was about to be sick. Brittany, still live streaming but clearly out of her depth, tried to regain control of the narrative. Okay, so apparently the deadbeat dad is actually rich, but that doesn't change the fact that she was harassing Marcus. Actually, Bobby said, turning toward her camera, it changes everything. Because every word of your little performance here has been recorded, and my legal team specializes in defamation cases. How's your bank account? Miss Stevens, because you're about to get very familiar with the discovery process. Brittany's confident smile faltered. I was just reporting what I saw. You were manufacturing content by encouraging assault and creating false narratives, Bobby replied. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to explain the difference to a judge. Sarah watched as the power dynamics shifted completely. Marcus, who had seemed so confident and in control minutes earlier, now looked like a man who just realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Wells was pulling him aside, their whispered conversation growing more heated. "We need to leave. Now, Wells hissed, "before this gets any worse." But Bobby heard everything. "Actually, gentlemen, I don't think anyone's leaving just yet," he said, "because the police should be arriving any minute." "You called the police?" Marcus asked, panic creeping into his voice. "I called them the moment you hit my daughter," Bobby replied. "Amazing how fast they respond when Mitchell Security Solutions reports an incident." Sarah heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. Everything was happening so fast. An hour ago, she'd been a broke, abandoned pregnant woman facing public humiliation and the loss of her child. Now she was the daughter of a billionaire with the resources to fight back against Marcus's manipulation. But as the reality of the situation sank in, Sarah realized that having powerful allies didn't erase the damage that had already been done. The assault was still broadcast to thousands of people. Her humiliation was still public. Her marriage was still destroyed. And she was still 7 months pregnant with a daughter who would grow up knowing that her father had publicly rejected and assaulted her mother. The sirens were getting closer, and Sarah knew that whatever happened next would determine not just her future, but her daughter's as well. She looked at Bobby, her father, this stranger who'd been watching over her from the shadows, and made a decision that would change everything. "I want them prosecuted," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "All of them. I want justice." Bobby's smile was sharp as a blade. "That can be arranged." The police arrived in force, 3 patrol cars and a detective who clearly knew Bobby personally. Sarah watched as her father transformed once again, this time into someone who spoke the language of law enforcement with native fluency. "Detective Morrison," Bobby greeted the lead officer. "Appreciate the quick response." "Bobby," Morrison nodded. "Got your call about an assault. Multiple witnesses?" "About 50, plus live stream footage from multiple angles," Bobby confirmed. "The perpetrator is Marcus Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Technologies. That's his lawyer, Harrison Wells. The woman with the camera is Brittany Stevens, accessory after the fact." Sarah noticed how Bobby presented the facts without emotion, like someone who'd briefed law enforcement countless times before. Detective Morrison approached Marcus, who was now visibly sweating despite the mall's air conditioning. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to ask you some questions about an alleged assault." "This is harassment," Wells interjected. "My client is the victim here. He was defending himself from his unstable wife's demands." Morrison ignored the lawyer, keeping his focus on Marcus. "Sir, did you strike the pregnant woman?" Marcus looked to Wells, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I will, and it wasn't like that. She was threatening me, trying to steal my money." "So you did strike her?" The question hung in the air. Sarah realized that Marcus was being forced to choose between admitting to assault or lying to a police officer. "It was self-defense," he said finally. Morrison made a note. "Self-defense against a pregnant woman who was threatening you, exactly." While Marcus struggled to answer, Sarah noticed Brittany trying to quietly end her live stream. But the damage was already done. Thousands of people had watched the entire confrontation unfold in real time. Bobby approached Detective Morrison with his phone. "I have security footage from multiple angles, plus audio of the defendant admitting to removing $43,000 from joint accounts without consent." "That's not theft," Wells protested. "It's marital property." "Actually," said a new voice, "in Illinois, depleting joint accounts during marriage for non-marital purposes can constitute financial abuse." Everyone turned to see a woman in a sharp business suit approaching. She was in her mid-30s, with Sarah's dark hair and determined expression. "Jennifer Hayes." She introduced herself to Detective Morrison. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell's sister and legal counsel." "Jen." Sarah stared at her sister in shock. "How did you know to come here?" "Dad called me the moment this started," Jennifer replied, giving Bobby a knowing look. "We've been coordinating your legal protection for months. Sarah, we just hoped it wouldn't come to this." Sarah's world shifted again. Not only had her father been watching over her, but her sister had been part of it too. The family she thought had abandoned her had actually been working together to keep her safe. This is insane, Marcus said, his voice cracking. You've all been conspiring against me. We've been protecting Sarah from your increasingly controlling behavior. Jennifer corrected. The isolation from friends, the financial control, the gradual erosion of her self-confidence. We documented everything. She pulled out a tablet and showed Detective Morrison a series of screenshots, recordings, and financial documents. Mr. Caldwell has been systematically isolating my sister from her support network, controlling her access to money, and gaslighting her into believing his abuse was normal marriage dynamics. Today's assault was the culmination of an escalating pattern. Wells was frantically taking notes, clearly trying to find angles for defense. But Sarah could see the confidence draining from his face as Jennifer methodically presented evidence of Marcus's abuse. Furthermore, Jennifer continued, Mr. Caldwell has been having an affair with Miss Stevens for approximately 4 months, during which time he's been transferring marital assets to accounts Miss Stevens has access to. That's not marital property management. That's theft and adultery. Brittany went pale. I don't have access to any of his accounts. Jennifer showed Detective Morrison bank records on her tablet. These transfers to your Venmo account to say otherwise, $15,000 over 3 months, ostensibly for consulting services that aren't documented anywhere in Caldwell Technologies' books. The web of deception was unraveling rapidly. Sarah watched as Marcus realized that his carefully planned humiliation of her had backfired spectacularly. Detective Morrison was taking detailed notes. Mr. Caldwell, you're under arrest for domestic battery. You have the right to remain silent. Wait, Wells interrupted. There's no need for arrests. We can settle this civilly. My client is willing to restore the funds and work out custody arrangements. Your client just committed assault in front of 50 witnesses, Bobby said quietly. There's nothing civil about hitting a pregnant woman. As Morrison continued reading Marcus's rights, Brittany tried to slip away through the crowd, but Jennifer was ready for that too. Miss Stevens, she called out, I wouldn't go far. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will want to speak with you about your role in the money transfers. FBI, Brittany's voice went shrill, then, I didn't do anything. You accepted payments for services you didn't provide, participated in the depletion of marital assets, and broadcast defamatory content designed to support financial fraud. Jennifer explained calmly. That's wire fraud, conspiracy, and defamation, federal charges. Sarah was amazed at how quickly Jennifer had taken control of the situation. Her sister had always been the practical one, the problem solver, but this was something else entirely. How did you know all of this? Sarah asked. We've had a private investigator monitoring Marcus for months, Jennifer admitted. Once Dad identified the abuse patterns, we started building a case. We hoped Marcus would back down before it got this far, but he forced our hand today. Marcus was being handcuffed now, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. This isn't over, he said to Sarah. I have rights. I have lawyers. You had lawyers, Jennifer corrected. Mr. Wells is about to have his own legal problems. Wells looked confused. What are you talking about? Bobby stepped forward, producing another set of documents. Harrison Wells, you're being served with a subpoena to appear before the Illinois State Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Seems there are questions about your handling of several high-profile divorce cases, particularly your methods for intimidating opposing parties. Wells's face went white as he read the documents. Sarah realized that her family hadn't just been protecting her. They'd been investigating everyone involved in Marcus's manipulation. How long have you been planning this? She asked Bobby. 6 months of preparation, he admitted. But I hoped we'd never need to use it. I wanted to be wrong about Marcus. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Brittany was being questioned by another officer about her live stream and the money transfers. The crowd of onlookers was slowly dispersing, many of them recording their own videos of the aftermath. Sarah sat on the bench, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. In the span of an hour, she'd discovered her husband's betrayal, been assaulted on live stream, learned her father was a billionaire, and watched her entire life restructured by a family she thought had abandoned her. Jennifer sat beside her, putting a gentle arm around her shoulders. Sarah, I know this is a lot to process. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah asked. All these months, watching Marcus isolate me, control me, make me feel like I was going crazy. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Because we needed you to be genuine, Bobby said, joining them on the bench. If you'd known we were building a case, you would have acted differently. Marcus would have suspected something. We needed him to reveal his true intentions on his own terms. So I was bait. You were protected bait, Jennifer corrected. We were monitoring everything. The moment he crossed the line into physical violence, we acted. Sarah touched her still stinging cheek. He crossed the line today. He crossed the line months ago with financial abuse and emotional manipulation. Bobby said, today he just made it visible to the world. Detective Morrison approached them. Mrs. Caldwell, we'll need a full statement from you, but given your condition and the stress of today's events, we can arrange for that tomorrow if you prefer. Sarah nodded, feeling exhausted. What happens to Marcus now? He'll be held overnight for arraignment, Morrison explained. Given the public nature of the assault and flight risk factors, I expect the judge will set substantial bail. And then what? Jennifer squeezed her hand. Then we make sure he never hurts you again. And we make sure he pays for what he's already done. Sarah looked around the mall corridor where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if reminding her that whatever came next, they would face it together. I want to go home, she said. Your apartment isn't safe, Bobby said gently. Marcus has keys, knows your routines. I've arranged for a security detail and temporary housing. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. This morning, she'd been unable to afford baby diapers. Now she had a billionaire father providing security details. Is any of this real? She asked. It's all real, Jennifer assured her. The money, the protection, the family that loves you, and the fact that Marcus Caldwell is never going to hurt you again. As they walked toward the mall exit, Sarah noticed that several people were still recording with their phones. Her private humiliation had become public entertainment, but for the first time, she wasn't the victim in the story. She was the daughter of a billionaire who just watched her abuser get arrested. The narrative was changing, and Sarah was finally ready to take control of it. The stress of the confrontation hit Sarah all at once as they reached Bobby's car, a modest sedan that she now realized was probably worth more than most people's houses. Her vision blurred, and sharp pains shot through her abdomen. Something's wrong, she gasped, doubling over. Jennifer was immediately at her side. Sarah, what kind of pain? Cramping. Sharp. Oh God, the baby. Sarah's voice rose in panic as she felt wetness between her legs. Bobby was already on his phone. This is Robert Mitchell. I need an ambulance at Westfield Mall. Main entrance. Pregnant woman. Possible premature labor. 32 weeks gestation. 34 weeks, Sarah corrected through gritted teeth. 34 weeks, Bobby repeated to the dispatcher. Yes, this is priority. My daughter needs immediate transport to Northwestern Memorial. As they waited for the ambulance, Jennifer held Sarah's hand while Bobby coordinated with his security team. Sarah noticed he'd shifted back into military mode. Calm, efficient, in control. The stress, Jennifer said quietly. This whole situation, the assault, the shock, it's too much for your body. Sarah felt another sharp contraction. It's too early. She's not ready. Babies born at 34 weeks do very well, Jennifer reassured her, but we need to get you to the hospital now. The ambulance arrived within minutes, an unusually fast response that Sarah was beginning to understand came with her father's influence. As the paramedics transferred her to the stretcher, one of them addressed Bobby directly. Mr. Mitchell, we'll take her straight to Northwestern's high-risk obstetric unit. Williams is already being notified. Even in her pain, Sarah registered the deference in the paramedic's voice. Her father's reach extended into every aspect of emergency services. The ride to the hospital was a blur of medical procedures and Jennifer's reassuring voice. But as they wheeled her into the emergency entrance, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Caldwell's wife, out on the live stream, unconscious when the baby comes. Two nurses were discussing her case, having clearly seen Brittany's broadcast. Is that her, the one whose husband slapped her at the mall? Sarah realized with growing horror that her assault hadn't just been witnessed by the people at the mall. It had gone viral. Millions of people had watched her worst moment, and now hospital staff were recognizing her from social media. Dr. Williams, the obstetrician, was a calm woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of Sarah's care. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, and Sarah noticed she'd used her maiden name rather than Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell, Sarah corrected weakly. Actually, Jennifer interjected, we'll be reverting to Mitchell for all legal documents. The marriage is over. Williams nodded professionally. Mrs. Mitchell, your contractions have stabilized, but we need to monitor you and the baby for the next 24 hours. The stress from today's trauma could trigger premature labor. As Dr. Williams examined her, Sarah caught sight of a television in the corner of the room. The local news was showing footage from the mall, her assault playing on repeat with commentary from legal experts. Turn it off, Bobby said sharply to a nurse, who quickly complied. But the damage was already done. Sarah's private nightmare was now public entertainment, dissected by strangers who would never understand the complex reality of her situation. The good news, Dr. Williams said, is that your baby appears to be handling the stress well. Strong heartbeat, normal movement, but I want to keep you overnight for observation. As Dr. Williams left to check on other patients, Sarah found herself alone with Bobby and Jennifer. The hospital room felt safe after the chaos of the mall, but she knew the outside world was still buzzing with her story. How bad is it? She asked. The media coverage. Jennifer hesitated. It's significant. The video has been shared millions of times across multiple platforms. What are people saying? Mixed reactions. Jennifer admitted. Some are sympathetic, calling it clear domestic abuse. Others are still buying into Brittany's narrative about gold digging and manipulation. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed. So even getting assaulted while pregnant isn't enough to make people side with me. Social media is complicated, Bobby said. But public opinion doesn't matter in court. Facts matter. Evidence matters. And we have both. A nurse entered to check Sarah's vital signs, but she kept glancing at Sarah with obvious recognition. Excuse me, the nurse said hesitantly, but are you the woman from the mall video? Sarah's heart sank, even in the hospital. She couldn't escape the notoriety. Yes, she said quietly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry that happened to you, madame. The nurse said, my sister was in an abusive marriage, and seeing your husband hit you like that, it brought back a lot of memories. The unexpected sympathy made Sarah tear up. For every person online calling her manipulative, there might be others who recognize the reality of domestic abuse. After the nurse left, Sarah's phone began buzzing with notifications. Despite Bobby's attempts to keep her off social media, she couldn't resist looking. The hashtag #mallassault was trending, with split reactions. This woman trapped a successful man with pregnancy, then demanded his money. He snapped under pressure. A man hitting a pregnant woman is never acceptable. This is domestic violence. Why was she filming this look staged for attention? I've been there. The isolation, the financial control, then public humiliation. This is textbook abuse. Sarah scrolled through hundreds of comments dissecting every aspect of her appearance, her marriage, her motives. Strangers were debating whether she deserved to be hit, whether her pregnancy was a trap, whether she was a victim or a manipulator. Stop reading that, Jennifer said, taking the phone away. Those people don't know you or your situation. But they think they do, Sarah said. And they're making decisions about my character based on a few minutes of video. Let them, Bobby said. While they're debating on social media, we're building a legal case that will hold up in court. Williams returned with test results. Your hormone levels are elevated, which is normal given the stress, but the baby is stable. However, I'm concerned about your blood pressure. It's higher than I'd like to see. Is that dangerous? It can be. If it continues to climb, stress-induced hypertension during pregnancy can lead to preeclampsia, which poses risks to both you and the baby. Sarah felt panic rising. What does that mean? It means we need to minimize your stress levels significantly. Williams said, no more confrontations, no social media, limited visitors. Your body needs to focus on keeping that baby safe. After Dr. Williams left, Sarah looked at Bobby and Jennifer. How do I minimize stress when my entire life has just been destroyed on national television? By letting us handle everything, Bobby said. Legal matters, media management, financial security. We'll take care of all of it. Your only job is to stay healthy and keep my granddaughter safe. But I can't just hide from this. Marcus is going to paint me as unstable, manipulative. If I don't defend myself, I'll defend you, Jennifer said firmly. In court, where it matters, let the internet have its opinions. We'll focus on facts. Sarah wanted to argue, to maintain some control over her own narrative. But as another contraction gripped her abdomen, she realized she might not have a choice. The baby's health had to come first, even if it meant watching strangers destroy her reputation while she lay helpless in a hospital bed. Okay, she whispered, but I want updates. I want to know what's happening. Bobby nodded. Everything, I promise. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, monitors tracking her vital signs and her baby's heartbeat, she wondered if she would ever feel safe in public again. The assault had lasted seconds, but its consequences would follow her for the rest of her life. Sarah woke to her phone buzzing with an urgent call from Jennifer. It was 6 a.m., and her sister's voice carried a tension that made Sarah's stomach drop. Sarah, we have a problem. Marcus made bail last night, and Herbie Wells filed emergency custody motions claiming you're mentally unstable and pose a danger to the baby. Sarah sat up in the hospital bed, her blood pressure monitor immediately starting to beep in warning. What do you mean? Custody motions. She's not even born yet. Prenatal custody orders, Jennifer explained grimly. They're claiming that your erratic behavior yesterday, combined with your hospitalization, proves you're unfit to make decisions for the child. They want court-appointed guardianship of the fetus. That's insane, Te? Can they do that? In theory, yes, though it's extremely rare, usually reserved for cases where the mother is actively using drugs or refusing medical care. But Wells is arguing that your confrontation with Marcus was evidence of poor judgment that endangered the pregnancy. Williams knocked and entered, carrying Sarah's chart. She'd clearly overheard the conversation. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to stay calm. Your blood pressure spiked during the night, and stress could trigger premature labor. Doctor, Jennifer said, could you speak to the legal threats my sister is facing? The father is claiming she's medically unfit. Brother, Williams looked outraged. Based on what she's been an exemplary patient throughout her pregnancy, yesterday's hospitalization was due to trauma-induced stress, not any fault of her own. Would you be willing to testify to that? Jennifer asked. Absolutely, any suggestion that Mrs. Mitchell is unfit is medically baseless and personally offensive. After Dr. Williams left, Sarah tried to process what was happening. So Marcus gets to assault me on camera, then use my reaction to that assault as evidence that I'm unfit to be a mother. It's a common abuser tactic, Jennifer said. Create a crisis, then use the victim's response to the crisis as justification for more control. Sarah's phone kept buzzing with notifications. Despite her resolution to stay off social media, she couldn't help glancing at the screen. New hashtags were trending, #pregnancy trap and #fake victim, alongside #domestic violence and #justice for Sarah. The internet was split, and the divide was getting nastier. The custody hearing is this afternoon, Jennifer continued. Emergency session. Bobby is hiring additional legal counsel, but Wells is good at what he does. What does he do? Exactly, Jennifer's expression darkened. He specializes in destroying women in family court. His reputation is built on convincing judges that abuse victims are actually manipulative liars. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if responding to her rising anxiety. How do we fight someone like that? With facts, medical testimony, and financial resources, Jennifer said. Bobby's already retained the best family law firm in Chicago. We're not going into this defenseless. But even with unlimited resources, Sarah felt vulnerable lying in a hospital bed while strangers debated her fitness as a mother. Dr. Williams returned with a wheelchair. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm discharging you with strict instructions for bed rest and minimal stress. However, I understand you have legal proceedings today. Is it safe for her to attend court? Jennifer asked. Physically, yes, with precautions. Emotionally, it's risky given her blood pressure issues, but given what's at stake, I think the stress of not being there might be worse than attending. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the Cook County Family Court, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious spectators drawn by the viral nature of her case. Judge Margaret O'Sullivan was a stern woman in her 60s who clearly didn't appreciate the media circus surrounding the proceedings. "This is an emergency custody hearing," she announced. "Not entertainment. Anyone disrupting these proceedings will be removed." Harrison Wells stood to present his case, and Sarah was struck by how professional and reasonable he sounded. "Your Honor, we're here today because of grave concerns about the welfare of an unborn child whose mother has demonstrated increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior." He presented edited clips from Brittany's live stream that made Sarah look aggressive and unstable, carefully omitting the context of Marcus's financial theft and emotional abuse. "Mrs. Caldwell's confrontation of my client in a public setting, her demands for money, her creation of a scene that required police intervention, all of this speaks to poor judgment that endangers both her and the child she's carrying." Sarah watched the judge's face carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. Judge O'Sullivan looked skeptical but was clearly taking notes. "Furthermore," Wells continued, "Mrs. Caldwell's subsequent hospitalization for stress-related complications proves that her inability to manage conflict is putting the pregnancy at risk." It was a masterful reframing of events. Sarah's victimization became evidence of her unfitness. Her hospitalization after being assaulted became proof of her instability. When Jennifer stood to respond, Sarah held her breath. "Your Honor, what we witnessed yesterday wasn't erratic behavior from my client. It was a normal response to discovering that her husband had stolen their life savings and was publicly humiliating her with his mistress." Jennifer played the unedited security footage that showed Marcus slapping Sarah without provocation. "Mr. Caldwell's assault on a pregnant woman is documented from multiple angles. The only person who demonstrated dangerous behavior yesterday was the man who hit an expectant mother in public." She presented medical records, financial documents, and testimony from Dr. Williams. But Sarah could see that Wells had done damage with his carefully constructed narrative. Judge O'Sullivan called a brief recess, during which Sarah overheard reporters discussing the case. "The husband's story makes more sense," one was saying. "Why else would she confront him so publicly, if not for attention? Did you see how she looked at the cameras? She knew she was being filmed." Sarah realized that even in court, even with evidence of Marcus's abuse, public perception was working against her. When proceedings resumed, Wells presented his final argument. "Your Honor, we're not asking for permanent custody. We're simply requesting court-appointed oversight to ensure that all decisions regarding this pregnancy are made in the child's best interest, not to serve Mrs. Caldwell's emotional needs or publicity agenda." The suggestion that Sarah was exploiting her pregnancy for publicity was devastating. She watched Judge O'Sullivan's expression and saw doubt creeping in. Jennifer made a passionate closing argument about domestic violence, victim blaming, and the dangers of punishing women for their abusers' actions. But when Judge O'Sullivan delivered her ruling, Sarah's worst fears were realized. "While I find Mr. Caldwell's behavior yesterday deeply concerning, I am also troubled by the circumstances surrounding this very public confrontation. Given the high-stress nature of this situation and its impact on the pregnancy, I'm ordering psychological evaluation for Mrs. Mitchell and temporary court oversight of major medical decisions regarding the unborn child." Sarah felt the world tilt. She'd just lost legal control over her own pregnancy. Wells looked satisfied. Marcus, who'd been silent throughout the proceedings, finally smiled. But Bobby was already whispering to Jennifer, and Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. "Appeal immediately. Emergency motion. Of federal connections." As they left the courthouse, Sarah realized that winning in court might require more than just legal expertise. It might require the kind of power that could reshape the system itself. And fortunately, her father had exactly that kind of power. Within hours of the court ruling, Bobby had assembled what looked like a war council in a downtown Chicago conference room. Sarah sat at the head of a mahogany table, still feeling surreal about her transformation from broke pregnant woman to center of a billionaire's strategic operation. "Tell me we can appeal this," she said to the team of lawyers Bobby had assembled. Margaret Anderson, a prominent family law attorney, was the city's most accomplished advocate for domestic violence victims. "We can and we will, but Judge O'Sullivan's ruling creates immediate problems. The court-appointed guardian can override your medical decisions until the appeal is heard, which could be weeks," added David Thompson, a constitutional law expert. during which time they could force medical procedures you don't want or prevent ones you do need. Sarah placed her hands protectively over her belly. The idea of strangers controlling her medical care felt like another violation. "There's something else," Jennifer said, sliding a folder across the table. "Our private investigator finished his background check on Harrison Wells." Sarah opened the folder to find photographs, financial records, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. "Wells has been taking bribes from wealthy men to manipulate family court proceedings," Jennifer explained. "Not just in your case. This goes back years. Multiple judges, multiple cases." Bobby leaned forward. "How solid is this evidence?" "Solid enough for federal prosecution," replied James Rodriguez, the former FBI agent Bobby had hired to investigate. "Wells has been operating a systematic corruption scheme. Rich husbands pay premium fees. Wells bribes judges and court officials. Favorable rulings get delivered." Sarah studied the documents. "Judge O'Sullivan. Clean as far as we can tell," Rodriguez said. "But the court-appointed guardian in your case, Dr. Patricia Hayes, received a significant donation to her nonprofit organization from a shell company connected to Wells." "How significant?" Sarah asked. $50,000, deposited the day before your emergency hearing." The scope of the corruption was breathtaking. Sarah's case wasn't just about domestic abuse. It was part of a larger system designed to protect wealthy men from consequences. "We turned this over to federal authorities," she said. "Expose the whole thing." "Already in progress," Bobby confirmed. "But federal investigations take time. Your baby will be born before Wells faces prosecution." Margaret Anderson had been studying the documents. "There might be a faster way. If we can prove that Dr. Hayes was compromised, we can get her removed and the custody ruling overturned." "How do we prove it without revealing our investigation?" Sarah asked. Bobby smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." The next morning, Sarah woke to news that sent shockwaves through Chicago's legal community. Harrison Wells had been arrested by federal agents on charges of conspiracy, bribery, and racketeering. The arrest was perfectly timed, just as Wells was arriving at his office, with reporters positioned to capture everything. Sarah watched the footage on the news, seeing Wells led away in handcuffs while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence from his firm. "How did this happen so fast?" she asked Bobby over breakfast. "The federal investigation was already underway," he admitted. "I just made sure they had all the evidence they needed and encouraged them to prioritize your case." Sarah was learning that her father's influence extended far beyond military contracting. He had connections throughout law enforcement, government, and the judicial system. Within hours, the ripple effects reached her case. Dr. Patricia Hayes voluntarily recused herself as court-appointed guardian, citing potential conflicts of interest that have come to light. Judge O'Sullivan scheduled an emergency hearing to reconsider her ruling in light of new information about corruption in the proceedings. But Marcus and his legal team weren't giving up without a fight. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think destroying my lawyer changes anything? I'm still the father of that baby. And I have rights. This isn't over." She showed the message to Bobby, who immediately forwarded it to Jennifer. "That's intimidation of a witness," Jennifer said. "We can use this." "He's getting desperate," Bobby observed. "Desperate people make stupid mistakes." But Sarah was worried about more than legal mistakes. The media coverage of Wells's arrest had only intensified interest in her case. Reporters were camping outside her apartment, following her to doctor's appointments, analyzing every aspect of her life. "I can't live like this," she told Bobby. "I feel like a prisoner." "Then let's change the narrative," and he said. "Instead of hiding from the media, let's use it." That afternoon, Sarah found herself in a television studio for her first and only interview about the case. She'd chosen Diane Martinez, a respected journalist known for her coverage of domestic violence issues. "Sarah," Martinez began, "you've become the center of a national conversation about domestic abuse, wealth, and justice. Tell us what really happened that day at the mall." For 30 minutes, Sarah told her story: the isolation, the financial control, the gradual erosion of her self-confidence, and finally the public assault that had exposed Marcus's true nature. She spoke about the complexity of abuse, how it wasn't always obvious, how successful, charming men could be master manipulators behind closed doors. I want other women to know that if someone is controlling your money, isolating you from family, making you doubt your own perceptions, those are our warning signs. It doesn't have to escalate to physical violence to be abuse. The interview was broadcast that evening to an audience of 12 million people. For the first time since the mall confrontation, Sarah felt like she'd been able to tell her own story without filters or manipulation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hashtag Believe Sarah began trending, with thousands of women sharing their own stories of financial abuse and manipulation. But the backlash was equally intense. Marcus's supporters accused her of playing the victim for sympathy, of using her father's wealth to destroy an innocent man. The division in public opinion was stark and bitter, reflecting deeper cultural battles about gender, power, and accountability. 2 days later, Judge O'Sullivan delivered her revised ruling. In light of new information regarding potential corruption in these proceedings, and after reviewing additional evidence of domestic abuse, this court finds that the previous custody ruling was based on tainted information. Sarah held her breath as the judge continued. Mrs. Mitchell retains full legal authority over her pregnancy and medical decisions. The request for court-appointed guardianship is denied. It was a victory, but Sarah knew it was just the beginning. Marcus still had visitation rights once the baby was born. The criminal case against him for assault was still pending, and the court of public opinion remained deeply divided. As she left the courthouse with Bobby and Jennifer, reporters shouted questions about her plans, her father's wealth, her relationship with Marcus. Mrs. Mitchell, do you feel vindicated? One called out. Sarah paused at the courthouse steps, looking at the crowd of cameras and microphones. I feel like the system worked, she said carefully. Not because of who my father is or how much money we have, but because the truth eventually came out. That shouldn't be a luxury available only to people with resources. It was a diplomatic answer, but privately. Sarah knew the truth was more complicated. Without Bobby's billions, without his connections, without his ability to accelerate federal investigations and hire the best lawyers, she would have been destroyed by Marcus and Wells's corruption. Justice might be blind, but it responded much faster to people who could afford to make noise. Still, as she placed her hands on her belly and felt her daughter kick, Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief. For now, at least, her child was safe, and Marcus Caldwell was finally facing consequences for his actions. 3 weeks later, Sarah went into labor naturally at 37 weeks, full term and healthy. The contractions started at dawn in the secure apartment Bobby had arranged, and within hours she was at Northwestern Memorial with Jennifer and Bobby by her side. Dr. Williams smiled as she checked Sarah's progress. Everything looks perfect. Your daughter is ready to meet the world. The labor was intense but mercifully short. At 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, Elizabeth Grace Mitchell entered the world, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces. Sarah held her daughter for the first time, marveling at her perfect tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair that matched her own. The baby's eyes opened briefly, seeming to focus on Sarah's face with startling awareness. She's beautiful, Bobby said, his voice thick with emotion. She looks just like you did. For a moment, all the legal battles and media circus faded away. Sarah was simply a new mother, overwhelmed with love and protectiveness for the tiny life in her arms. But reality intruded quickly. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Williams said gently, Mr. Caldwell is here requesting to see his daughter. Hospital security is asking how you want to handle this. Sarah's peace shattered. She'd known this moment would come, but holding her vulnerable newborn made the thought of facing Marcus unbearable. He has legal visitation rights, Jennifer said reluctantly. The criminal case is still pending, but the family court ruled he can see the baby with supervision. I don't want him near her, Sarah said, instinctively tightening her hold on Elizabeth. I know, Bobby said, but we have to follow the law, even when the law is inadequate. 20 minutes later, Marcus entered the hospital room flanked by 2 security guards and a court-appointed supervisor. He looked different, thinner, older, with the drawn face of someone under enormous stress. Sarah's first instinct was to protect her daughter, but she forced herself to stay calm. Elizabeth was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the tension filling the room. She's perfect, Marcus said quietly, approaching the bed cautiously. Sarah watched his face, looking for signs of the man she'd once loved. the man she'd married believing they would build a life together. For a moment, she saw genuine awe as he looked at their daughter. Her name is Elizabeth Grace Mitchell, Sarah said firmly. Mitchell? Marcus looked up sharply. She's my daughter, too. She should have my name. She should have the name of a family that will love and protect her, Sarah replied. Not the name of a man who assaulted her mother on camera. The court supervisor, a stern woman named Miss Rodriguez, intervened. Mr. Caldwell, you have 30 minutes for this visit. I suggest you focus on meeting your daughter rather than arguing about names. Marcus looked like he wanted to fight, but something in Miss Rodriguez's tone warned him off. He moved closer to the bed, studying Elizabeth's sleeping face. Can I hold her? He asked. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to say no, but under Ms. Rodriguez's watchful eye, she carefully transferred Elizabeth to Marcus's arms. The baby stirred slightly but remained sleeping. Marcus held her awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with such a tiny, fragile person. I never wanted it to be like this, he said quietly, not looking at Sarah. Then why did it become like this? Sarah asked. Why did you steal our money? Why did you humiliate me? Why did you hit me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Elizabeth. I felt trapped, he finally said. The pregnancy, the financial pressure from the business, your constant need for reassurance. I felt like I was drowning. So you decided to push me under instead of asking for help. I thought if I could just get some space, some financial breathing room, I could figure things out. But you wouldn't let go. You kept pushing, demanding attention I didn't have to give. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even holding his newborn daughter. Marcus was rewriting history to make himself the victim. I pushed for basic communication about our shared finances and future, she said. I demanded the respect and partnership that marriage is supposed to provide. You demanded more than I could give, Marcus replied. And when I tried to create boundaries, you turned your family against me. Bobby stepped forward, his voice carrying a warning edge. My daughter asked you for partnership and honesty. You responded with theft, adultery, and assault. Those aren't boundaries. Those are crimes. Marcus looked up at Bobby with barely concealed hatred. Of course you'd take her side. You abandoned her for 12 years, and now you're trying to buy forgiveness by destroying me. I protected her by staying away, Bobby said quietly. But I should have been protecting her from you all along. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Elizabeth stirred in Marcus's arms, making small fussing sounds as if sensing the hostility around her. She's getting upset, Miss Rodriguez observed. Mr. Caldwell, I think it's time to return the baby to her mother. Marcus looked down at Elizabeth for another moment, then carefully handed her back to Sarah. The baby immediately calmed, settling against Sarah's chest with a soft sigh. I want joint custody, Marcus said. 50-50 time. She's my daughter too. You're facing criminal charges for domestic violence, Jennifer pointed out. The court isn't going to award joint custody to someone who assaulted the child's mother. That was one moment of poor judgment, Marcus said. It doesn't define me as a father. It absolutely defines you as a father, Sarah said, her voice steel. A father protects his family. He doesn't steal from them, betray them, or assault them on live stream. Elizabeth deserves better than a man who thinks hitting women is just poor judgment. Marcus's face hardened. This isn't over, Sarah. I have rights, and I'll fight for them. Your father's money won't protect you forever. It's not about money, Sarah said. It's about the truth. And the truth is that you're dangerous, Marcus. Not just to me, but to any woman who doesn't submit to your control. Ms. Rodriguez ended the visit, escorting Marcus from the room. As the door closed behind him, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and dread. The immediate confrontation was over, but the battle for Elizabeth's future was just beginning. Bobby sat in the chair beside her bed. How do you feel? Sarah looked down at her daughter, who was now awake and watching her with dark, curious eyes. Scared, don't even care, she admitted, but determined. Elizabeth is going to grow up knowing she's worth fighting for. She's going to see what real strength looks like, not the fake power that comes from hurting people weaker than yourself. Jennifer squeezed her hand. She's going to have the best family supporting her, the kind of family that shows up when it matters. As the sun set outside the hospital window, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. She'd lost a marriage, but gained a family. She'd endured public humiliation, but found her voice. She'd been assaulted and betrayed, but emerged stronger. Most importantly, she'd brought a daughter into the world who would grow up surrounded by people who believed in justice, protection, and unconditional love. Marcus might have legal visitation rights, but Elizabeth would always know who her real family was, and that knowledge would be her greatest protection against anyone who tried to hurt her. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of her new home, a beautiful colonial in Winnetka that Bobby had purchased but put in her name, watching Elizabeth take her first tentative bites of baby cereal. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a garden where Sarah was planning to teach her daughter about growing things. "She's got your stubborn streak," Jennifer observed, laughing as Elizabeth spit out another spoonful and reached for the spoon herself. "And apparently my father's determination," Sarah added, watching her 6-month-old daughter grab the spoon with surprising coordination. The criminal trial had concluded the week before. Marcus was sentenced to 2 years in prison for domestic assault, with an additional year for financial fraud. Harrison Wells received 8 years for his corruption scheme, which had affected dozens of families over nearly a decade. More importantly for Sarah's peace of mind, the judge had terminated Marcus's parental rights based on a pattern of domestic violence and his complete lack of interest in Elizabeth's well-being during his supervised visits. "Any regrets?" Bobby asked, joining them at the breakfast table. He'd been staying in the guest house since Elizabeth's birth, making up for 12 years of missed time with his daughter and granddaughter. Sarah considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been married to a man she thought loved her, living a life she thought was normal. Now she was a single mother, a domestic violence survivor, and inadvertently, a public figure whose story had sparked national conversations about financial abuse. "About leaving Marcus, none," she said firmly. "About the way it happened. Sometimes, I wish Elizabeth didn't have to grow up knowing her father assaulted her mother on camera for millions to see. She'll also grow up knowing her mother fought back," Jennifer pointed out. And won. The victory hadn't been complete or clean. Sarah still received hate mail from people who believed Marcus's version of events. Conspiracy theorists claimed Bobby had orchestrated the whole thing to advance some mysterious agenda. Dating seemed impossible when any potential partner could Google her name and find detailed accounts of the worst day of her life. But there had been unexpected positives too. Sarah's interview with Diane Martinez had led to speaking engagements at domestic violence organizations. Women reached out daily to thank her for helping them recognize financial abuse in their own relationships. "I got another message this morning," Sarah said, checking her phone. A woman in Phoenix who realized her husband was doing the same things Marcus did, controlling the money, isolating her from family, making her doubt her own judgment. "That makes, what, 200 this month?" Bobby asked. 237, Sarah corrected. "And 3 women who said our story gave them the courage to leave dangerous situations." It was a strange silver lining to trauma, but Sarah had learned to find meaning in the attention her case had generated. Elizabeth banged her spoon against her high chair tray, demanding more attention. Sarah scooped up another spoonful of cereal, which her daughter accepted with royal grace before immediately smearing it across her face. "Your Honor, Sarah said in mock formality, I present Exhibit A, Elizabeth Grace Mitchell's complete mastery of breakfast." The baby giggled, a sound that never failed to make Sarah's heart flutter with joy. Elizabeth was thriving, hitting every developmental milestone early and displaying what Dr. Williams called remarkable social awareness for her age. "Speaking of breakfast mastery," Jennifer said, "I have news. The Illinois State Bar Association is implementing new ethics training requirements based on the Wells case. They're calling it the Mitchell Protocol, mandatory reporting of suspected judicial corruption in family court." Sarah felt a flush of pride. Her nightmare had contributed to systematic change that might protect other families. "And there's something else," Bobby added. "I've been talking to Senator Richardson about federal legislation around domestic violence and family court proceedings. She wants to meet with you about testifying before Congress." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had never imagined her personal trauma becoming the basis for national policy. Would you be okay with that level of exposure? Jennifer asked. It would mean more media attention, more scrutiny. Sarah looked at Elizabeth, who was now attempting to feed cereal to her stuffed elephant. Her daughter would grow up in a world shaped by the choices Sarah made now. If it helps other women, other children, then yes, she said. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge against Marcus anymore. He's facing consequences for his actions. This is about making sure the system works better for the next woman who finds herself where I was. The doorbell rang, and Bobby went to answer it. Sarah could hear voices in the entryway, her father talking to someone in professional tones. He returned with Dr. Williams, who was carrying a small gift bag. I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit, Dr. Brahma Williams said. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how Elizabeth is doing. It was a kind gesture, but Sarah suspected there was more to it. Dr. Williams had become not just Elizabeth's pediatrician, but something of a family friend and advocate. She's perfect, Sarah said, lifting Elizabeth from her high chair. Strong, healthy, and already showing signs of being too smart for her own good. Dr. Williams examined Elizabeth briefly, checking her reflexes and responses. Exceptional development, she confirmed. But I actually came to talk to you about something else. She pulled an official-looking document from her bag. I've been asked to serve as an expert witness for a congressional hearing on family court reform, specifically to testify about the medical impact of financial abuse during pregnancy. Sarah realized this was connected to Bobby's conversation with Senator Richardson. They want real cases, real outcomes. Williams continued, your story, combined with the medical documentation of how Marcus's abuse affected your pregnancy, could be powerful evidence for legislative change. It was becoming clear that Sarah's private trauma was evolving into something much larger, a case study in how domestic abuse intersected with legal, medical, and social systems. What would that mean, practically, Sarah asked. Mandatory training for family court judges about domestic abuse patterns, stricter oversight of custody proceedings, federal funding for legal aid in domestic violence cases. Bobby explained. Real structural change? Elizabeth had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, her tiny fist curled around her mother's finger. The simple trust in that grip reminded Sarah of what was really at stake. Okay, she said quietly. Let's do it. 3 months later, Sarah sat in a congressional hearing room, Elizabeth babbling happily in Bobby's arms in the gallery behind her. Cameras captured every word that as Sarah testified about financial abuse, judicial corruption, and the need for systemic reform. Mr. Chairman, she concluded, no woman should have to be the daughter of a billionaire to receive justice in family court. No child should have to depend on their grandfather's connections to be protected from an abusive parent. The system should work for everyone, regardless of their resources or relationships. The legislation that emerged, the Family Court Accountability Act, passed with bipartisan support 8 months later. It included mandatory domestic violence training for judges, federal oversight of family court proceedings, and funding for legal aid in abuse cases. On the day the bill was signed into law, Sarah received a handwritten note from a woman in Ohio. Because of your courage, I was able to leave my abusive husband and keep my children safe. The legal aid attorney knew exactly what to look for because of the training your case made possible. Thank you for turning your pain into protection for the rest of us. Now that evening, as Sarah tucked Elizabeth into her crib, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The assault at the mall had lasted seconds, but its consequences had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives. Elizabeth would grow up in a world that was marginally safer for women and children because of what had happened to her mother. She would know that trauma could be transformed into purpose, that personal pain could become public good. Most importantly, she would know that she was surrounded by people who had fought for justice, not just for themselves, but for strangers they would never meet. As Sarah turned off the nursery light, she whispered the promise she made every night. You are safe, you are loved, and you will never have to face the darkness alone. Outside, the security detail Bobby still insisted on maintaining kept watch. The legal battles were over, but Sarah understood that true security came not from guards or money, but from the knowledge that she had found her voice and used it to make the world better. Marcus Caldwell had tried to silence her through intimidation, manipulation, and violence. Instead, he had inadvertently given her a platform that reached millions. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you is simply refusing to be destroyed and building something beautiful from the wreckage they leave behind.